welcome to episode 9 of the Zesty Dietitian podcast. I'm your host, Mackenzie Caldwell, registered dietitian and founder of Feed Your Zest, Nutrition and Wellness. I'm so pumped to jump into this episode with you all. I'm interviewing one of my really good friends here in Charlotte, Jessie Hoffman. She's amazing, and we are going to dive into the topic of gut health and hormonal health and all of their connections. This is such a hot topic of interest, and there's a lot of buzzwords, a lot of misinformation out there, and also a lot of actually evidence-based interventions we can do to help you have better digestion and a lot of interesting connections between hormonal health and your digestive health as well. So a little bit more about Jessie. Jessie Hoffman is a registered dietitian, associate professor at Winthrop University, and researcher in the field of human nutrition. Her dietetics and research experience are in gastrointestinal conditions and the gut microbiome. Additionally, Jessie is passionate about scientific and nutritional science communication and does so regularly through social media. From breaking down nutrition science to busting myths that are so prevalent in today's society, she strives to empower individuals to become responsible consumers of social media content and experts on their own bodies. Let's dive into episode 9. Hello, Jessie. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast. I'm so excited that we get to do this today.
I am so excited to chat. I know we chat a lot, just like, I don't know, like kind of professionally, but friendly too. But it's nice to do this in like a formal environment. So
yeah, absolutely. Sometimes I think about, that was one of the reasons I started this podcast, is because I'm like, I have such fun conversations with my dietitian friends. And sometimes I wish people could overhear them. So awesome. Well, one thing that I always like to start out asking my podcast guests is something I ask all of my patients, which is, what are some of your favorite foods? Words.
Oh, so I am not picky whatsoever. I like any and all food, but I really love sushi. Sushi's like a really, really good go-to. I love like all raw tuna is probably my favorite fish. I will go for a tuna-based roll over any sort of fish any day. As a dietitian, one thing I really don't enjoy is salmon, which I feel like that like dietitians aren't allowed to like not enjoy salmon. I feel like that's a thing, but I don't like salmon. But
so controversial. Wow.
I know. I'll eat it, but it's not my favorite thing. I love fries. Fries are like a move. My favorite thing, like when I'm going out to eat, I love a big salad too, but my favorite thing to do at a restaurant is just like get the massive salad and fries. Salad and fries. Mm-hmm. That's the move. So
it
all
is.
Of those.
Yeah. It's such a move. Yeah. It's so delicious. And you get like your protein, veg, carb, fat.
Yeah.
It's all there. Friends, gang's all here. It's great.
Yeah.
And I actually have talked to a number of people who prefer tuna but not salmon, and a number of people who prefer their fish raw also. They're like, oh, I'm so weird. I'm like, you're actually not alone. Like, I've heard this a lot. And people don't know that tuna also does have omega-3s in it. We do need to be slightly cautious with our mercury content, especially for those who are pregnant listening to this. Yes. But it is not devoid of omega-3s. That is a fact. So you get to have whatever seafood you want, and the haters can hate on you not liking salmon. And what are some of your favorite ways to move your body?
Lately, I've really been enjoying yoga. I really love hot yoga specifically because I've always loved to sweat. I just feel like such a release in my body when I sweat. Mm-hmm. And I've noticed with hot yoga, I can just like get deeper into poses because your body's just a little more warm and flexible. I really love cycling too. We have like an indoor bike. And I can ride that for hours sometimes, like train long distance. I tried that one time, but I love cycling because it's just like I have to have a TV in front of it. I can just kind of like tune out. Mm-hmm. Like it's a very gentle way to move my body because I come from a history of like I used to run a ton, which is not a very gentle way to move your body. But I still like to sweat and get my heart rate up. So hot yoga and cycling are the move right now. Yeah.
So they're like intense but lower impact, and that seems like your body likes that.
Yeah. My body likes that.
I love that. I wish I could do hot yoga. I don't know what it is. I can do a regular vinyasa yoga flow class, and it can be kind of hard, and I will feel great. The second that the heat gets above like 90 something degrees, nope. Absolutely not. My body like shuts down. I actually feel like I'm gonna pass out. So I am jealous of the people who can handle hot yoga and really like it, because I can see.
It's so nice this time of year too.
Yeah,
like when
exactly.
I walked into the studio, it was like in the teens last week, and like I walked into the studio, it just felt so good to just like, oh, it's so warm.
Yeah, I love that. Well, awesome. Well, let's get into like some of the nitty gritty things that we want to talk about today. I know that you got your PhD and studied a lot of things that have to do with the gut microbiome. So what inspired you to get your PhD in the first place? What led you there? And then how did you land on studying the human gut microbiome?
Yeah. Long story short, with what inspired me to get my PhD was pretty much indecisiveness of like, oh crap, I have to adult now. What do I do? Like more school.
Easy choice, honestly.
I know.
A little bit too easy sometimes.
It's just easier just to say, continue with school, continue being a student. I'm not an adult yet. But my undergrad, I kind of have a roundabout way into like nutrition in and of itself. Like my undergrad was in biology, and it was at the end of that I was like trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I changed majors so many times. I thought I was going to be a teacher. I thought I was, which I ended up kind of being a teacher, but like I thought I was going to go in like a high school and be a biology teacher. Really quickly realized that was not for me. And then I just thought I was going to be pre-vet. Decided I like animals too much, and then I just settled on I really had a passion for nutrition, and decided I was like, well, I'm gonna go get my master's in nutrition. And then I was kind of in that, and I decided during my master's I was doing research. We were studying the effects of table grapes. I studied all stuff in mice, so very like mechanistic, heavy research kind of stuff, like not super applicable, but still interesting. But we were studying the effects of table grapes on like insulin resistance, cardiometabolic health, and like adiposity and like where it was depositing in mice, and like in response to like high fat feeding and stuff. And it was that was like 2013, 2014, and that was when the gut microbiome was really like new in research and people were just starting to talk about it. And my mentor at the time was very interested in it, and he was like, well, we'll just tack this onto the study. Like, it's easy. Like, you just click poop and you tack it onto the study, and we will study the microbiome. And so that's where I first was like, oh, what is this? And because I had to do a lot of reading and writing my like thesis for that. And so that got me really interested in like the gut microbiome. And kind of as I was wrapping up my master's, I decided like, oh, I don't know if I'm done yet. I was like, I think I want to go get my PhD. I met my husband during my master's too. We got married, and we both decided we wanted our PhDs. And so we both were kind of going to this in the same direction. And I was thankfully admitted to a lab where I had an older mentor who had a lot of funding. And he was like, I don't really care what you do, like as your project, as long as it relates to like our overarching theme, which were environmental pollutants and how they impact like cardiometabolic health. Still mouse research, but the way in which we were exposed to these pollutants was through oral ingestion of contaminated foods. And I was like, no one's studying the microbiome. Like that's like obviously going to impact the microbiome. So that's kind of how that came about. It like didn't think I was interested in it, and then I happened to be interested in it. And then on top of everything, I developed IBS throughout the course of grad school. So of course you get interested in gut health.
Seems to be the moral of the story with a lot of dietitians is that a lot of us have some sort of like personal experience with
of course
food.
of course
And then trying to figure it out for ourselves, or maybe it's like a close family member or something like that too.
I think all of us have a story.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. So that's kind of like how you ended up just like falling into the nutrition world. How did you specifically decide to become a dietitian?
So this gets into some other stuff I know you're going to kind of talk about at some point, but I in high school had an eating disorder, as we just mentioned, like everyone has a story with nutrition. And that was my first, like during recovery was my first kind of like introduction to working with a dietitian. It was very not as hands-on as you might have thought, but it was like, oh, what is this person? They work with food kind of thing. And so didn't really think much of it at the time, but after going through my undergrad and trying to like ping pong through different, like what am I really interested in? I kept coming back to like nutrition. And of course, when I started my undergrad, I wasn't in a place where I could pursue nutrition, like from a healthy standpoint. And as a professor now, I see that with a lot of students. We have those conversations of, is this really the healthiest thing for you to be doing right now? And thankfully, I had the support system at the time to say, nah, maybe not. But then towards the end, I kind of reached that healthier spot of like, this is what I really want to do. And so I was very fortunate during my master's and PhD to have supportive mentors who basically were like, go back and take the undergrad classes to become a dietitian. So I kind of had a roundabout way of like, I took a couple during master's and then I finished during my PhD. And then after I defended my dissertation and my PhD, I went back and did my dietetic internship after that. So I have a very roundabout way. You know, the traditional way for most people is to, you know, get their bachelor's, now get your master's and do your dietetic internship, kind of all in one sequence. But I kind of had a roundabout way of figuring that out, which I actually found out is not that uncommon for PhDs in our field. There's a lot of people that get their PhD and they're like, oh, I think I want to go back and be a dietitian, because you realize you're like, I have all of this like, you know, basic knowledge of nutrition and stuff, but I want to like work with people,
right?
You know?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people are kind of like you said, going into like the master's and or PhD track because they're just like, I even felt like that with getting my MPH. Like, I'm just not done learning yet. I just like, I feel like there's more for me to do. But then when you're looking at kind of like that fork in the road of, do I want to just do academia or do I want to work with people? That's like all that's presented to you, but you can absolutely do both. And for those that are listening too, if you are interested in research or teaching, you don't have to have your PhD to teach nutrition. I am an adjunct professor. That's kind of one way that I have kind of become closer with Jessie, is working at Winthrop. But if you take some of those classes while you're doing your PhD, you will be getting paid while you will be taking those classes, which might be a lot more financially feasible for a lot of people. Yeah. Hypothetically.
My pathway was actually extremely financially feasible. Like, I was very blessed and like thankful to have like a full ride scholarship at my really tiny university, and that was mainly the only reason I went there. It was like super tiny, and it was like a state scholarship or something. But then my master's, I was a research assistant. I was doing thesis work that was paid for. Like, my tuition was paid for, and I got a really tiny stipend, which was still fine to live off of. And then my PhD too, like, your tuition's paid for and you get a stipend, you know, that's somewhat close to enough to live off of.
Yeah. Absolutely. We're definitely in a kind of an area where our field is just undervalued and underpaid for sure. So all of those little tiny ways that we can find funding, I think, are just important to talk about, so people just know.
I try to encourage so many students of like, if you have any sort of interest in research, go find a place that will pay you to get your master's or pay you to get your PhD. Like, just it's worth it for sure.
Absolutely. Well, anyways, switching gears, gut health is just like a really big buzzword online right now, especially when it comes to hormonal health. I'll get a lot of my patients, especially those maybe with PCOS, that are just like, well, I know gut health is important, so what do I do about that? And I have some of the things that I say, but I want to hear what you say when you're on a podcast or on social media or with your patients. What are some of those connections between our gut health and our hormonal health that are actually based in evidence?
Yeah, and so the way I usually present it is anytime we're talking about like GI health, the gut microbiome, all of this, we still don't know enough to be able to make like definitive statements of like X, Y, and like this is exactly how it happens. But there are a lot of like interconnected variables that influence GI health and influence things like PCOS and hormonal health. Our hormones actually interact with our GI tract in kind of a unique way, especially kind of throughout the cycle. And so different hormones that are peaking at different times have different effects. And so a lot of times we'll see like when estrogen, starts to peak, sometimes we'll see people get a little more constipated. Progesterone kind of ends up having some of the similar effects with making people feel a little more constipated. And so we're seeing kind of all of those like kind of start to build up and stuff kind of throughout the middle of the cycle and around ovulation and a little after ovulation. And then it's like when you get towards your period, like progesterone will drop, and that's when things start really moving, because estrogen, progesterone, and they tend to have like an impact on GI motility. So they tend to slow it down. Mm-hmm. It's not always the case with everyone, but they tend to slow things down a little bit. And so when you have any sort of fluctuations in those hormones, and even some of your androgens too. Luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone too are not as studied with GI stuff because it's unsure if we have like receptors necessarily for those in the gut. But really it's those flux of hormones. So what I see with most people of the interaction of like gut health and hormonal health and individuals that are menstruating kind of across their cycle, we usually see like we feel our best like right after our period. Usually like during our period, some people feel their best from a GI perspective. It depends. But then like right after, like you feel like basically like debloated, like you just feel like your gut's been moving good, you're cleaned out, everything is, you're feeling good, your gut's moving. And then it's like as you start to move throughout that cycle, you get towards ovulation and things just start backing up. Like a lot of people deal with kind of some ovulation pain. Maybe you'll deal with a little bit of bloat around that time. And then things are just kind of wonky there on until you start to menstruate again for a lot of people. And then when you start to menstruate, we have like other molecules that come into play, like prostaglandins that like help us contract like our uterus and stuff, that gets like the blood flowing and everything out. But we also have some that hit our gut too, and so that's where that like period poops kind of thing comes from, where people are like, I feel like my bowel movements are so loose around my period. But really like when it gets down to the nitty gritty of like the connection between PCOS and like GI health or like IBS even, it's thought that there may be an interaction with the gut microbiome there. With IBS, we know that there is disruption in that gut-brain axis, so communication between our gut and our brain, and it influences some of the hormones that are kind of secreted and produced kind of around and in the gut. And with PCOS, it's really thought that might be kind of influencing a little bit of that as well. But that's like still a very new area of research. So long story short, like there are some overlaps between people that are having GI concerns and PCOS, and just feeling a lot of those effects of PCOS in your lower abdominal tract can like, exacerbate feelings of like GI concerns. Like I think a lot of people don't really appreciate how close like your uterus and your ovaries really are to especially like your like descending colon, rectum, and anus, like on that kind of left side of your body. Like if you are ovulating from your left side and that ovary is like swelling and you're having some swelling and stuff in that area, that very well may cause some pain and some issues with GI motility. It's all in there together. So it's a really fascinating area for sure.
Yeah. And I was just going to say, like, especially if you have endometriosis and there's like some of that endometrial tissue, that's not where it's supposed to be, and it is on the colon. And that's why pelvic floor PTs often work a lot with folks who have both pelvic floor kind of like sexual health concerns, but also digestive concerns too. But overall, what I'm gathering,
I was going to say, I refer out to like pelvic floor PTs all the time for diarrhea and constipation. A lot of times they're really helpful for diarrhea and helping people learn to like properly engage their pelvic floor. Like super, super interconnected.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's good for me to know. I think most of my referrals are usually, my population that I work with is people that are trying to conceive, pregnant, postpartum, and then with endometriosis as well. I knew about how they might be able to help with constipation, but I never really thought about it with diarrhea. So that's good for me to know too. But I think the main thing I'm gathering from what you're saying is we know how hormones affect the gut, and we know less about how the gut affects hormones.
Yeah, there's interactions, and what you'll see a lot is people will fearmonger a lot about like, you need to eat X way because there's going to be estrogen that builds up in your gut and you have to secrete it. And yes, like estrogen can like, get in the gut, can be bound by certain things like fibers, and you can help like excrete it. But like our bodies are pretty smart. That's usually what it comes back to. Like our bodies are pretty smart. And for most people, like just focusing on like the basics of just like eating a diverse diet, making sure you're getting enough fruits, veggies, whole grains, legumes, like a balanced, rounded diet, and you're fueling yourself enough, is gonna like, help the most. And I think one of the things that I see like as a confounding kind of variable with a lot of people that have PCOS is like a lot of people have weight concerns too, and they're having those concerns, which often leads them to like restrictive diets and different things like that. And there's so much misinformation out there with PCOS of like, you need to cut out X, Y, and Z. And then they're like cropping up with all of these GI issues. And Yeah, it's because you're restricting your diet. If you're not putting things into your body, you can't move your gut. So things are not going to feel that good. And so I think that's a big confounding variable, is like a lot of the information online is just like, well, if you have PCOS, or information given by doctors is like, well, you need to lose weight.
Right.
You know, you're insulin resistant. Like, you need to lose weight. Like, this is what you need to do. And it's just it doesn't take care of the whole individual, and it doesn't actually address the root issue. And it's frustrating.
Apologies for the drag racers on my street right now that you may be able to hear. That's Charlotte for you. It's just a busy road. But yeah, absolutely. That's something I bring up with my patients a lot, is that like the movement, the weight, like our gut is a muscle, and it does this wavy motion called peristalsis that moves like from the moment you swallow all the way down. That movement takes a lot of energy. So we have to be eating enough calories. But then also, if we're cutting things out of our diet, we might end up unintentionally limiting fiber. But even just like the volume of food, if we're eating a low calorie diet, we're not going to get enough food, and then like you can't poop it out if you're not putting it in situation.
I mean, it's very much a like, if you don't use it, you lose it kind of thing, of like, if you were to just go lay in bed all day and never move your body, like your muscles would start to atrophy. Like even if you don't have to lift weights to like maintain your muscle tone, but like if you just like laid there and did absolutely nothing, and like your muscles would atrophy. The same thing happens with your gut. If you're not putting things in to like stimulate those contractions and stuff, like you're gonna have some issues, which, you know, ends up being a lot of problems for people. Like after restrictive dieting phase, they're like, well, now I have all of these GI issues, or it's really uncomfortable to eat now because your gut's not used to moving food.
Right. Yeah.
You know?
And it requires consistency throughout the day too. And that's where kind of we do see like, albeit like very limited research on increases in cortisol for women who try intermittent fasting. But from a gut health perspective, if you are restricting your eating to a certain time period, then that's going to be just like a lot more food at that time. It's just not going to make your body as happy.
And we have something called the migrating motor complex that exists within our GI tract. It's fascinating if you haven't looked it up.
No.
But essentially it helps regulate kind of the motility of our gut, and it's kind of on like a cyclical kind of like time pattern of like our gut is kind of expecting like to have kind of this cyclical pattern every 3 to 4 hours. And so it's, you know, usually when I'm working with people that, you know, have constipation, it's like a recommendation is we need to be eating every 3 to 4 hours. One, we don't need to be grazing 24/7 because that's kind of like confusing for your body. But then two, we don't need to be going like 6-8 hours without eating because that's confusing to your body. And if you're going to have some dysmotility and your gut's not going to be moving right if you're not having kind of getting in the wave of that migrating motor complex. Yeah, it's fascinating. If you haven't looked that up.
No, I remember learning a little bit about kind of like gut motility timing, but I don't think I could say that one more time. It's called
the migrating motor complex.
Motor complex.
Yes,
super
MMC.
cool. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yes, a really hot area of IBS research. So
That's super cool. But yeah, just like talking about how new this research is. People are like, oh, like they've been doing this research for 10 years. Okay, well, that's actually not, in research world, that's nothing. That's absolutely nothing. Nutrition science as a whole is still a very new science, and we do know a lot, but we are still learning more and more and more. And I was just thinking about kind of like the estrogen that you were bringing up. That is a recommendation I make for my patients who have endometriosis or PMDD is we can focus on fiber, but we don't have to be crazy about it.
No. Yeah.
Our bodies can get rid, our bodies are getting rid of any hormones that are made from cholesterol, like estrogen and like progesterone, in the same way that we get rid of cholesterol itself. And that is through our bile, and bile can bind to fiber, and then we poop it out. And then if it's bound to the fiber, we can't reabsorb it. So that's how it's
my favorite mechanism. I rant about that in class all the time. It's my favorite mechanism ever.
Me too. The enterohepatic circulation of bile.
Yes. And reverse cholesterol transport. We love it. We love it.
Sorry for any non-nerds that are listening. Excuse us. But really, like you were saying, are we eating fruits and veggies? Are we finding some other fiber-rich sources of foods like whole grains, legumes, nuts and seeds, things like that? It doesn't have to be crazy. We don't even need a fiber supplement unless there's very specific cases where we might. But most people do not need one or need to hyper focus on anything beyond the basics in order to support that balance from the gut side. So yeah, ultimately we know that hormones affect our gut, and we know more about that. Everything else we are still learning a lot more about, and there's not, if you hear black and white statements from the internet, it should be kind of cause for pause to really examine and see whether or not that's a true statement or not.
For sure.
Some skepticism would be really good there.
Yes.
So I know you started talking a little bit about your disordered eating history. If you feel comfortable, can you talk us a little bit about kind of how that affected your body, especially on the front of irregular cycles, menstrual cycles?
Yeah. So I had a like restrictive kind of disordered eating pattern. So definitely wasn't getting enough like energy, was over exercising, mainly doing really high intense exercise like running. So like things that are not gentle on your body. And that really, like, I lost my cycle pretty quickly during a lot of that. And it was, looking back, it was very frustrating at the time because like the first recommendation of like a pediatrician was just like birth control. Like, you don't have your cycle, birth control. And that, like, we're talking about 15, 20 years, like 15 plus years now. Like, we know better. We probably knew better then, but we definitely know better now, of just like birth control for like not examining the root cause is just a Band-Aid. And like, that's not, you're still having the impacts on bone health and all that kind of stuff too, if you're not like actually restoring your cycle. And so that was never really communicated to me. And I kind of got caught up in like what historically was called like the female athlete triad, which we now more appropriately kind of name relative energy deficiency of sport. I was running cross country in college and no one had their period, and it was just kind of like normal for athletes not to have their period. No one was talking to us about nutrition. And so it was, years that I went without a cycle. And it wasn't until I was like deep into nutrition courses and stuff that I was like actually like learning about like, oh crap, this is like actually has some like health complications. And it's sad that it took that point, because I had coaches and teammates and therapists and stuff that could have said something at some point in time. I'm very blessed that like my bone density, I probably started from a bone. My genetic makeup is we got some really dense bones. And so like I didn't hurt myself that much, thankfully, with that. But what I did notice, like even when I was weight restored and even when I wasn't, I felt like I was fueling my body well and I was eating well. It was even persisting throughout grad school. Like I was still running and stuff like that, but I thought I was doing everything right. My body just does not like running. So it was just like weight restored, eating enough, probably not based on the fact to get my cycle back, but like it seemed like from a numbers perspective, eating enough, and it never came back until I stopped running. And still to this day, like if I pick up running and decide that I'm going to get like a spurt of running and start running more than like, 5-6 miles in a run, like consistently on like a weekly basis, like several times a week, I'll lose it. I can be fueling myself like perfectly. And so it's just like my body has a stress response to it. And so if you're listening to this and you think you're doing everything right and you're feeding yourself really well and like you still don't have your cycle back and you run, like try moving to a gentle form of movement, because running is pretty stressful on the body sometimes.
Yeah, it really can be. It absolutely can be. And I always encourage my runner clients that it is possible to get your period and be a runner. Yeah. It's probably going to take a crap ton more food than you think. And it's probably going to take... Go ahead.
I was going to say, I have so many conversations with runners of like, you can't eat a perfect diet. Like you can't eat like perfectly like healthy, like vegetables 24/7, like all that, like, you're going to have some, what you would consider, like a lot of times, like what clients would consider like junkier foods, more processed foods. Like if you're going to get calories in, you're going to have some like candy. Like
I was going to say, it's going to take sugar. It's going to take sugar and it's going to take fat in their simplest forms if you want to be running that much. And that's okay. Like, it's just okay. You're allowed to have this goal of being a runner, if that really is important to you. Maybe that's your career, or maybe that's just something that really helps you feel good, or you just have always wanted to run a marathon and it's just something that you really, really want to do. If you also want to have optimal reproductive health, we're going to have to look at you as an individual, get rid of the food rules, and kind of tailor things specifically to you. And if your goal is to get pregnant right now, but you identify yourself as a runner, we might need to kind of explore therapy and look at who you are outside of being a runner so that you can kind of meet those other goals, those other life and health goals that you have for yourself too. So yeah,
it's really important.
Absolutely. But yeah, thank you for sharing that. We talked a little bit about disordered eating and how that affects digestion, but specifically, what ways do you see diet culture actually worsening our gut and hormonal health?
Yeah, so the really cool thing about, if we're going to get at the gut microbiome, the really neat thing about the gut microbiome is that it changes really rapidly in response to dietary changes. And so restriction in any form, even if you're eating an adequate, sources of fiber and, you think you're feeding your gut, you're eating all of the good prebiotics and stuff, your microbiome can still shift. And that, we're still learning what that means. Thankfully, usually your microbiome is pretty resilient and it can bounce back, upon those shifts. But if we're thinking about someone that is yo-yo dieting or chronically dieting or jumping from diet to diet, and not having that just steady diversity of your dietary habits, you're kind of throwing your gut microbiome for a loop. And that's kind of, that's getting a little more into the weeds of we don't know everything about what that means, but we kind of already touched on, what diet culture tells us about or has the influence on gut health of, if you're restricting and you're not eating enough calories, you're not moving your gut. Most people are going to deal with some sort of GI disturbance because if you're not putting anything in your body, there's nothing to come out. Yeah. And so that's the biggest one that I see with a lot of people of, I work a lot with GI clients and we do kind of an intake assessment. And you're like, tell me everything that you ate yesterday, kind of walk me through what we had to eat yesterday. And then I'm just thinking in my head, oh my goodness, this is not enough food. No wonder we're constipated. That is the majority of a lot of my clients. And it's we have to work on food's going to have to increase and your weight may change, but it may not, and that might not be so what if it does, Yep. So we work through a lot of those things, but the biggest way I see diet culture crop up in GI stuff is really just through people dealing with constipation, or if we're going on the opposite end, all of the prebiotic foods are so popular right now. Everyone is consuming the prebiotic sodas and the fiber-rich foods, and it's okay, well, we need some other just foods too. We can't just be eating fiber, or else we're going to be on the toilet all the time. But that's kind of a new cropping up of diet culture, is this gut-focused, gut health diet culture that's kind of emerged. Historically, it's just restriction, and then we deal with constipation. But now it's just okay, well, we're just going to eat so much fiber that we're not going to eat any other carbs or fat or protein.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's all about that balance, and our guts do need fat and protein too. There's absolutely some the actual muscle needs protein, the cells there need protein.
Your
fat
enzymes,
does things too. There's enzymes.
Digest all the food. Those are proteins.
Enzymes are proteins. They are. And I think a lot of people don't know that prebiotics literally are just fiber, and that we can just get them from food, that we don't need them to be in special food form. No. But I'm not going to lie, I do love a Poppy.
I do.
They're delicious.
I love a Poppy. I my stance on these prebiotic sodas and drinks like that is probably not the golden magic ticket for your gut health, but honestly a decent substitute for soda for a lot of people. Yep.
Absolutely.
Go for it.
Yeah, if reducing added sugar is one of your goals, and you're not feeling scared about it, and it just feels like a very positive swap for you, it can be a great thing to add in. But not everybody's gonna be able to tolerate it, and there is a difference between the amount of prebiotic fiber that is in Poppy versus Olipop. It is not the same.
Poppy is way more reasonable for most people. Yes. With my IBS clients, we usually don't go for both, but I do have a few that love a Poppy, and I'm you're fine. It's got, like 2 to 3 grams versus like whatever, Olipop has.
Yeah, absolutely. And, like, we should just talk about it since I know it's probably going to come up, but colostrum, just tell me what you think about colostrum.
Oh my God.
Sorry, she's triggered.
One of my coworkers and like really good friends is an RD and a lactation consultant, and she just cringes. She's like, why? It's like, colostrum is like, not meant for adults to drink. Like, there's no really biological mechanism or meaning why you would need to drink it. Just because it has a lot of nutrients in it doesn't mean, I don't know. And it all breaks down to the same, like... Yeah. And the supplements that are on the market, like colostrum supplements, I don't, like, how are you even trusting that that's just not powdered milk?
Literally.
Like,
Literally. Yeah, so, absolutely. Because
supplements are not regulated. If you're listening to this and you don't know that, supplements are not regulated.
No, the FDA does not regulate the supplement industry, and the current administration is very anti-regulation, so I can't see that getting any more regulated. And yeah, so thank you. I'm with you completely.
I think my initial response just, said everything that needed to be said.
Absolutely.
I'm willing to change my mind, but I don't think it's a feasible thing for people to say, like, if it even ends up research showing that it's good for gut health, like, how are we going to make this work for everyone to be consuming this?
Yeah, exactly. We know that it's probably beneficial for infants to get colostrum from mom, and I think that's super cool when we call it like it's not golden milk, but liquid gold is kind of like something we can talk about, like collecting even prenatally at the end of pregnancy, and it's super cool if that happens, and it's awesome scientifically, but like it never has been meant for human adult consumption, and it's the colostrum that you're getting is from a cow and not from anyways, so
I know it's weird that we went from the whole, like, everyone was fearful of just like dairy milk because it was like from a cow and not like, like everyone, like there was a lot of like buzz about like you're just drinking like
mucus
excrement from we went from that to like, no, let's drink the colostrum.
Which is like the most mucusy part ever.
Yeah.
So strange. So. It's so strange. And then the other end of diet culture is still saying that dairy is inflammatory and that it's bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can't.
So on the and a lot of what you were saying too, kind of like the restriction and lack of diversity also affects our hormonal well-being too, whether it causes you to kind of be underfed enough that your body can't produce enough hormones, and then we end up with hypothalamic amenorrhea, which is kind of like what you were describing happened to you in high school and you dealt with through your early 20s. But then even with PCOS or endometriosis or Hashimoto's, our bodies hormonally are going to thrive on consistent, adequate intake of a wide variety of foods every single day.
Yep.
Which is the opposite of what diet culture tells us we need.
Yep.
So not only is it damaging to your gut health, it is also going to not be helpful for your hormonal well-being either.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So how do you help your clients improve their gut health in a way that is aligned with a healthy relationship with food?
Yeah, so kind of like I said before, when I'm meeting with a lot of clients, I hate using the term holistic because it's got like a connotation around it a lot of times, but like I do approach
whole person.
I know I approach people as like a whole person. So I work a lot with clients that have IBS, and IBS, if you're we've talked about it a little bit, but if you're unfamiliar, like it's a spectrum of like conditions. It basically just means your gut is finicky, something's wrong. It ranges from people having diarrhea and having issues kind of controlling their bowels to, going days without having bowel movement. Some people have a version that's kind of mixed and their gut's just kind of wonky. And, when I'm doing like an initial kind of assessment with people, like a lot of people think they're going to come to me and I'm just going to be like, well, what are we eating? What can we cut out? Like, what can we cut out? A lot of times I'm having conversations of what can we add in instead.
Yep.
But I'm also having conversations about like, what is your sleep like? What is your stress like? What is your, like, what do you do for fun? Like, how do you move your body? Like, we're thinking about all of these things. We think about pelvic floor. Like, are you straining to have a bowel movement? Are you having problems controlling your bowels? Like, we even ask questions sometimes about like, how often do you go to the dentist? Because your mouth is connected to your GI tract, and like having suboptimal dental health can contribute to some of those issues too. And so we really think about like things as a whole, and it's very common for, you know, every single session I leave clients with, I'm like, okay, what are some goals and things we're going to work on? And so, you know, maybe one's related to food, but a lot of times it's like, let's focus on developing a morning and nighttime routine, like something that's sustainable. We talk about like toilet time. Are we having, like, we call it like good toilet hygiene of like, you know, like not going, a lot of people think that, you know, you go into the bathroom. Guys are specifically like the worst for this. And I had like a client this morning be like, is there a biological advantage for why guys go into the bathroom and they're in the bathroom on the toilet for like 30 minutes? And I'm like she was trying to get it like, what is the deal? Why does everyone do this? And I was like, I don't really think that's a thing. But like sitting on the toilet for really long periods of time when you are trying to have a bowel movement actually like can cause some pelvic floor issues for a lot of people. And it's not like good hygiene in terms of like your mental status when you're going into the bathroom. Yeah. You really want to associate your body to associate sitting on the toilet with, I'm either peeing or like I'm going to have a bowel movement, not like we're going to scroll Instagram and TikTok for 30 minutes. Right. And so we talk about a lot of those things. So honestly, like food is just a small component. We of course, you know, look through like dietary like history and triggers and stuff. And then one common like dietary strategy that a lot of people may recognize when we talk about like IBS and gut issues is there is a diet, like a therapeutic diet called the low FODMAP diet, which essentially removes a bunch of these like fermentable like fibers usually, and limits them in the diet because they produce a lot of gas and bloat and cause a lot of IBS symptoms in people. My approach to that is I don't do the full low FODMAP diet with people 99% of the time because it's a very restrictive diet. A lot of times I can look at their food log of like, you know, tracking your food really loosely or giving me a recall of your food, keeping kind of a log of like your GI symptoms and when those are cropping up and saying like, hey, you had this at this time and now you're seeing GI symptoms. I think it's this food because we have some like high list of foods like onions, garlic, asparagus. Some of those like are issues for a lot of people. And so usually I cherry pick rather than, you know, have people do full blown eliminations.
But even with the elimination, the goal is always to reintroduce. And that's like,
for sure.
From the one CEU I did from Monash University on that was like, here's the thing, but like, this is not a forever thing. It's meant so that we cut them out and then introduce one at a time to see if there is reaction. But what I'm hearing from you in practice is that even that is not necessary most of the time, and that a lot of the times it can be a little bit more obvious, or maybe there's even just some more super basic things that we can do first.
And honestly, I see a lot of overlapping clients who have disordered eating patterns because, you know, we do have that overlap between like, did you have some disordered eating and it caused GI issues, or did you have GI issues and it caused disordered eating? Right. So a lot of times I don't even like restriction is not a thing. You know, I have a client I'm working with now, and, you know, one of the first prompts is to like kind of loosely track your food for a little bit. And, you know, she like approached me in the email before we even had our first session, was just like, I come from a restrictive background. I was like, absolutely don't track your food. Like, we'll talk about it and I can figure it out from what we talk about. Like, we don't need to track your food. We'll figure it out.
We don't.
You know?
Our skill set as dietitians is like bigger than that, and we can be creative. And if your dietitian is unwilling to be creative, find a new one. Awesome. Well, this has been such an awesome conversation, and I'm like coming up with more questions that would like make us talk for like 2 more hours. But I love this. Like, we didn't even get to talk much about like GI health in pregnancy or like celiac disease and all of that. So maybe those are like future topiks that maybe we'll circle back to at a future episode or something. But for now, any final thoughts for us?
No really final thoughts, of just kind of the consistent theme of GI health and supporting your gut health does not have to be complicated. Like, dietitians, we sound like broken records when we're like giving yourself fruits, veggies, whole grains, legumes, proteins, fats. Like, regularly in adequate amounts, consistently every day, like that's going to be the best thing for your gut health. Not going and buying all of these supplements and doing all of these different protocols to try to improve your gut health.
Right.
Your gut likes consistency. Your gut loves consistency. So feeding yourself well and taking care of stress levels and stuff when you can is going to be honestly the best for your gut health.
Yeah, awesome. I love that. Regular eating for regular bowel movements. We love it.
Yes, we love it.
Where can folks find you?
Yes.
And tell us like some of the things that you're working on, the things that you do. I'll went over this in the intro that I'm going to record after this episode. But for all of the things, where can folks find you?
Yeah, so the easiest place to find me, I do have a TikTok, but I don't post there. I stalk, and not stalk, but like TikTok is like a doom scroll, like you know, that's what I do there. But I'm mainly on Instagram, so I'm at Jessie Hoffman _PhD. I am trying to be more consistent there, so I enjoy doing some educational stuff there. I do have a website too if you're interested in inquiring what it's like to work with a GI dietitian. My website's jessiephd.com. All of my contact info is there. There are links to like book appointments or inquire about it. Always reach out to me via email. I'll get back to you and kind of let you know if I have availability to take on clients. And yeah, one thing you'll cover in the intro is I'm a professor too. So if you are an aspiring dietetics student, like contact me. I will get you plugged in. Like, come learn. I am the grad director for our master's program. If you would love to get your master's in nutrition, or if you'd love to become a dietitian and need to go back and do kind of the roundabout, taking undergrad courses and then go that way first, like we serve those populations. And so you can find me there. Shoot me an email. I'm at Winthrop University. We would love to have you.
Yeah, and you have a podcast with Hope,
I do have a podcast.
Who also works at Winthrop too. But
yes.
It's caffeinated decaf?
Decaf and debunk. So you can find us there. We have like 9 episodes right now, and we're getting ready to launch season 2 of our podcast. So we like to gab on there. There's a lot of other GI conversations there too.
Love that. Awesome.
So, yeah.
Well, again, for any dietetic students listening, Winthrop is a really great program. One of our associate dietitians with Feed Your Zest is Kristen Carney, and she went to Winthrop. I loved teaching there. Great program. Can only say good things about it. But yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Jessie. It was great to have you on, and I hope you have an awesome rest of your day.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for having me.